Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co-host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast-producing badass.
I'm John Thomas. Some would say that I go a little too far with my love of all things horror, paranormal, and meta, but I say, talk nerdy to me, and I'm all yours.
The Dead of Winter Horror Network and Nick King from the 508 Productions invite you to endure the most terrifying immersive experience in all of podcasting. Beneath the Red Umbrella, now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Beneath the Red Umbrella, when the snow falls, the killing season begins.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of our horror readers out there? In today's episode, we'll be joined by author Blake Edward Andrew to discuss his book, The Haunting of Chateau de Mornay. Welcome to the show, Blake.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, very excited to have you on. I got my book. I ordered my book. It came in. I'm very excited. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I'm definitely in the process of reading it, and I love it so far.
Awesome. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, I ended up getting the Kindle version. I like to read on the iPad, so that's kind of how I do my reading, but it's been good.
Nice. How was the formatting on that one?
It's good. Yeah, I don't think there's any issues so far.
I haven't seen any.
Okay, that's good. I noticed when I turned it on, I was like the chapter numbers were like askew just a little bit sometimes, and like I have no control over that once I submit it, so it's tricky.
All right.
We have no point of reference, so for us, it's just like, oh, cool, okay.
I think that's one of those author things. Like I work so hard to get everything right and straight, and I think it's a common thing for those ebooks on the site. So
Right, because it's like if it's just the page layout. It could be bigger or smaller than what it actually is. And are you
yeah,
looking at 2 pages at once or 1 page or?
exactly.
So with The Haunting, how long did it take for you to write this book? I know you've talked about it, and John's going to ask, how did I connect with you? So maybe I'll backtrack to that for a moment. So Blake here, he promotes his book on TikTok, and I stumbled upon, because I trained my algorithm to only show me amazing content. I stumbled upon his live, and he was holding up the book, and the cover just immediately drew me in. So I paused on the scrolling, and I was like, ooh, what's this? What's going on with this? And heard him, giving the synopsis of his book and talking about things. And Blake here, he gives like Q&As during these live sessions. So I got pulled in right away and immediately ordered the book.
Perfect. That's what I want.
Your TikTok promotions are working. It's effective.
That's cool. I do like the cover, though. That's really awesome.
Thank you very much. The artist I got in touch with years ago. So just real quick background on it. When I started writing the book 7 years ago, to answer that question, I didn't write that whole time. I had a lot of life changes. I had to move. I quit my career to finish the book and write it. And so yeah, it was. I had a nightmare about it while I was writing it, and I saw what was on the cover. I was like in the chateau, and I saw this giant skull on the mountain talking to me. It was quite frightening, and I woke up in the morning, and I'm like, that's going to make a pretty cool cover. So I got together with some artist friends, and they got me in touch with this gentleman named George Sellas, Sellas, and we started working on it, this corresponding through email back and forth, and I told him what my dream was. It wasn't just a dream. It was, it was literally, this happened. And so he kicked it out, and we threw a lot of versions around, and uh, ultimately settled at the very end. I had it made really early in the writing process because I like visual content when I'm writing, and so I had a poster made, and it's sitting up on my above my writing area. It's kind of like that's the book I need to finish, and it motivates me. And so anyway, he threw the red on at the end. That was like a last. It used to be black and white, 100% just grayscale, and then he threw the red in, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's the one. That's more eye-catching. So yeah, so that's where it came from. Like I said, he's working on book two cover right now. I think he just finished it. We went through it pretty fast. So
I mean, the red absolutely changes it. I'm looking at the cover and it's just like picturing it in just completely a grayscale would be a different cover. The red absolutely makes a difference. So you said you like visual things when you write. Prior to
mhm.
having the, mock up of the cover, did you have anything on the wall before that was there?
Yeah, I did. I found some just photos, just kind of browsing around on the internet, and I found some things that were really contextual to what I was writing. And I printed them out and just stuck them up on the wall. And again, it was just that helps me. It helps me stay focused. It also kind of gets me in the mood. I have a very specific writing area. I've got my desk, but I like to write it since it's like a gothic horror novel. I like to have the lights off with my laptop, and I have 10 like little candles that are flickering, but they're those electronic like remote controlled ones. So those are flickering, and I'm just like kind of writing by moonlight or candlelight, and yeah, but it just really helps me. I'm gonna do the same thing for book two. I'm writing it right now, but now that we have the cover done, I'm going to get a poster made and stick it up on the wall.
So you heard that, BJ, like that whole environment that he set up. We got to try that.
Yeah, because
That's amazing. Yeah.
we're we're definitely writers ourselves, but not like we're more script writing for films, short films, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think for me that's helped too. I haven't thought about printing them and actually putting them on the wall. I think that's a really good idea. Like I've done a few visuals where I have it on the computer screen next to me, but I feel like yeah, like having the whole setup like that is much more. It just jogs the mind, right? Like it gets you going. Do you add music when you're doing that too, or what is for specifically for this one?
Yeah, definitely. Good question. When I was writing this book, I mean, like I said, it was over a period of many years, just stops and starts. I hung it up for a year. I didn't even touch it. But usually, since it's especially the part that goes back to the French Revolution, when we go back to 1789, 1790 period, I definitely put on some Bach and some Vivaldi, some like creepy harpsichord music, especially when I'm writing the antagonist Luke's section. He's got a big section in the book, and that's mostly the back in time part. And that's his favorite artist. He loves Bach, and I just always thought of it like that's kind of like his rock music, like that's what he likes to listen to, and like gets him in the mood. And he's a wily, almost Loki-esque, morally gray character, as you guys will probably see or have seen. So I loved writing him. So yeah, the music for that was mostly like the harpsichord, Baroque harpsichord. But when I was writing the spicy content, I got stuck on this one piece of music that just I put it on repeat because it kept me in the mood and it just fit, and it was Chris Isaac's Was It Wicked Game.
I love that
I love it
Yep.
too.
Yep.
And for some reason it just worked, and I just did. I hit it on repeat, and it didn't get boring. I didn't get tired of it. It just really got me, into the characters, and I mean, it's, salacious and everything, but I mean, it got me into their minds too. The spicy content isn't just there for fun. It definitely moves the story. So
Oh yeah. Ashley, weren't you just not too long ago giving us a version of that song? That
Yes, there is a cover that I love. It's Wiki Game, and it's by Stone Sour. The
oh,
Corey
it's ve-
Taylor does an amazing job covering that song.
I may have heard that actually, but I will check it out again. I forgot about it.
I love it. And I like that his version takes it even like darker. And so
Hmm.
that's one of my favorite covers out there of just cover songs in general. So
Maybe I'll put that version on for book two, since book two
yes.
is so far is going to be darker than book one. So
For all those reading the book too spicy content, you are welcome. Now, are there any of the characters in book one, book two, because I know you're in the process of book two, that you personally feel you identify with more, or maybe that you've written pieces of yourself into?
definitely, overall, the whole book, all the characters have like pieces of me or pieces that people have known or some of the things that happen, just the thematic things, a lot of like trauma and family drama and betrayals and things like that. But to answer that question specifically, I loved writing Luke the most because I love a good bad guy. I just love a good bad guy and a complicated bad guy who really believes in what they're doing. That's they're not just there for evil. They think what they're doing is good from their perspective. And so he's a very complex character. There's definitely bits of me in there, because we've all made some mistakes in our lives and stuff. And Luke is definitely not a perfect when you he's definitely not a perfect person. So I loved writing him the most, and and also Anna, the main character. She was a challenge for me because it was my first time writing a woman from a woman's perspective as the main character, and I really enjoyed that. And I've really enjoyed people's responses to that. There a lot of women have responded and said, "Hey, you did a good job writing. Like it doesn't sound like it was written by a man." And I really liked that. That was actually something I really wanted to accomplish.
Did you have to get any outside opinion along the way to make sure that the character was landing as, a woman, or did you just like I'm going to write the whole way through and see how it goes?
I definitely during the process, I mean, the first draft, when I started developing her and she was coming together, I had people read her. I had some, female friends read her and ask. I asked the questions and they're like, "Oh yeah, I mean, you can't tell. You can't tell." So I was like, "Perfect, that's great. Well, I'm doing the right thing then." And so and then I just further developed her, as more people read her and so yeah, she's not a perfect person either. So I love characters that just are questionable. You're even the main character kind of like, oh, she's not perfect and stuff. So
Yeah, everybody's complicated. We all have
exactly,
layers.
exactly. I was trying to write real reality. Also I was writing a supernatural horror novel, but trying to really get deeply into the characters.
I did like when I was reading about Anna, just the whole description of just almost because she's like a travel blogger, right? Initially, like just the
Yeah.
whole um the excitement of being at one of these places and visualizing the past, going
Hmm.
back to these times where we're all just excited to be. You just feel, you can kind of feel just the essence of what was there, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a big draw for me personally. And that was my next question was, with these characters and these places, have you had any experience yourself going to some of these old chateaus? Like I looked up online to see if there is a Chateau de Mornay, right? Um, in
You
France.
found one, didn't you?
I did find one.
Yeah.
But I haven't actually. I've just online, right? I haven't been to it or anything, but
Right.
there's just so much rich history there. I guess my question is, what was the motivation for all of that? Picking France and have you been to those some of those places?
Well, I visited Europe a long time ago, and I was a kid, so I didn't have the same filtration and contextual interest that I would now. Like it would be very different. But yeah, I went into castles, I went into old churches and cathedrals, and I mean it was just crazy. I went to Notre Dame in Paris and Eiffel Tower and all that stuff, and I remember what it felt like. I remember what these very old buildings felt like. Like we don't have anything like that in the United States. Like that's the main thing. And so, and as for the French history part, I love French history, particularly that time period, the French Revolution. I studied it in college for probably a good year, and then the post like Napoleonic era, and so when the story came together from just, I was reading more about people, especially Americans, moving to Europe and buying these old buildings that are falling apart, and other, not just Americans, but several people all over the world, but their goal was to restore them so they don't crumble and fall apart to history, and so I loved that they were going to renovate them and live in them, turn them into tourist places or bed and breakfast. And so that's where the story really kerneled from was, okay, like let's drop a French chateau in there that was built in 1681 and it has survived the French Revolution. It survived some really nasty things, and at one time it was a happy place, and it had a relatively happy, rich aristocratic family in there. And so I just built a story around all of that put together, came up with a couple Americans who had the ability to afford something like that. Even in a chateau that's very broken down, it's still, not cheap. So I had to make sure that, Brad is a famous actor. So I really like that aspect because most characters aren't from that perspective. It's not from like, oh, like this very rich person. Like they're usually like a little bit more downtrodden. They're struggling in life or whatever. So I wanted to present what if these people had the ability to do this. So yeah, I mean that's where it all came from.
And I love the way you started the book. I mean, can we talk about Vivian? Holy
Oh yeah,
moly.
absolutely.
Yeah, like that character, starting a book with a character as powerful as that and as cutthroat for the greater good, right? I mean, you see her qualities later within, our villain, but she's not really a villain. And not, it depends who you ask, but like just starting on action and starting on something terrifying, like you created such an intense moment in such a short amount of time that, at least for me, I feel like I'm hiding in the fireplace with her, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're gonna find her, they are, but oh, you don't want them to. And it was a really powerful scene, and you talked about that on TikTok. Can you elaborate, because I don't want to give away things.
Yeah, so yeah, she's based on. I mean, I did a lot of research for this, of course, and I'm really fascinated with World War II and French occupation by Germany during that period, and so I read a lot about resistance fighters, and there were some women in there, but they were really tough. Like they existed amongst thousands of men, and they were just tough as they were, and some of them did incredible things, and so she's an amalgamation of a lot of that. And I also wanted to again have a real strong kick-ass woman just open the book, even though she's not the main character. Excuse me, she's not the main character. I wanted to present that really fast. That was something important to me. Again, my goal in that book was I wanted to have Anna, I wanted the main character to be a strong woman. And so Anna's the main character, but Vivian starts the book. And I actually wrote that chapter much later in the first draft. It was like chapter 22 or something like that. And as I was putting the book together, the second chapter where they tour the chateau was chapter 1. And I was like, okay, this is not fast enough. This does not lend people to come in here and be like, oh, this is, fun. It is definitely a slower chapter. So I tried to create that roller coaster effect. Like you have a fast chapter and then maybe you slow down a little bit, you can breathe, and then you have another accelerating chapter. And so it just goes up and down, up and down. So I moved that chapter to chapter 1, the one with Vivian, where she's being immediately pursued by the German soldiers. And it also creates this foreshadowing that something that could happen to Anna later on in the book. And foreshadowing is one of my favorite writing techniques. I just absolutely love it. I love dropping Easter eggs, foreshadowing like in certain sections, and then they get picked up later on. The readers love that. I love writing it like that. And so, you jump right into it. And then the prologue was something I wrote almost at the very end, because I was like, let's drop something else in there that's brief but powerful and gets you in the mood as to also, the chateau's on fire. It looks like it's about to be destroyed in the prologue, and it's only half a page. But then you jump into chapter 1 and the chateau's still there. So there's this big mystery, like they didn't have like a fire brigade during the French Revolution. Like how did that fire get extinguished? It's one of those questions. So yeah.
Yeah, you definitely had me sucked in, I'll tell you that. I did not
Awesome.
know what to expect. And those first pages, I was like, holy shit, yep, this is going to be great. And yeah, that whole first chapter, exactly like you were saying. Roller coaster. Loved
Yeah,
it.
it was intense, and thank you. It was intense, and I actually edited it. It was a little more gruesome,
Mm,
and with the Gestapo officer, she did a little bit more to him.
nice.
And so I had some, my readers read it, and they're like, some of them were like awesome, like the horror people were like, leave that in,
I would have been like,
but
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
but then other people were like, I didn't self-publish immediately. I did the querying route for a while, and the agents ask you to send 10 to 20 pages, and page 5 is like this really, really, really gruesome section, and I was like, I'm probably turning a lot of agents away just from that. So I did edit it out, and it's still pretty gruesome, but it's a little more tame.
Do you ever, I don't want to say regret, but do you ever think that like reconsider that like you might put that back in, or you're like, no, this is good. I'm glad I made that choice.
I think that's a really good question. I do waver back and forth, and I mean, I have gone back, like I just released um, new versions with new back covers where I added I edited the back and I added a couple 5-star reviews that people love that I really, really liked. I really liked the way they wrote them. So, I mean, since I am self-published, I can make changes whenever I want. And so, but I haven't really thought about that section and that real gruesome part. I mean, people would definitely be talking about it, and it would come up on the podcast. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh, we got to talk about what happens to him." But I mean, it takes her hatred even further of the not, the Germans in her country, and her working so hard to get them out of there. And it definitely makes her a more gruesome person, a more gruesome character. So, good question. I may possibly drop it back in there. It's literally like 3 or 4 more sentences. It's pretty quick.
I mean, all three of us have read it, and it's not like we came to you saying, I felt like it was missing something.
Yeah, yeah,
We wouldn't have known that you pulled back that you restrained something. But if given the option where it's like, hey, you want to go darker, I will always say, yeah, let's go there. Let's do it.
Well, it helps having that again. It's since hundreds of people have responded to me
Mhm.
and read the book, and I'm hearing more of that. Like, is the next book going to be darker than this? I mean, this was dark, but like the real dark people are like, can you go darker? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely can.
I say it's whatever tone you're wanting to set. What's your story? What are you wanting
Yeah,
to tell? So it definitely, by no means is it not dark. Like even in that first chapter, like the different scenarios that you've pieced together, the ability to create that tension so quickly and that fear and put your character in a terrifying space, like holy cow, hats off. Like that is phenomenal. And I think that wherever you decide to take us is going to be a fun journey for us to go to, especially in book two.
yeah, yeah. And again, going back to Vivian, like the spot that she's in, she's ready. She's ready to meet her maker at that moment. She's all bravery. There's no cowardice in her whatsoever. So she's she's just an awesome character. I loved writing her. I loved putting her together, and I know she just has a brief a part in the book, but she's the opening, and she really sets the tone for what's going to happen in the book.
So we're going to have a book 3 that's like origin story of Vivian, right? No, just kidding. Just kidding.
It's possible. I mean, I'm putting I've pretty much put book 2 together, and I haven't really put a lot of thought into. I mean, book 2 is actually coming. It's so full right now that I may just break it into 2 parts and make book 3 like kind of like the continuation of book 2. That's kind of the way it's forming right now, and I'm totally okay with that.
Now, speaking of your process of how your books come together, how do they? I mean, do you outline first and piece things together, or do you write scenes as they come to you? What is your process?
When I first started writing the first book, I had it all in my head first. I had not outlined it. I actually started the book with, I wrote chapter 2. Like, okay, here's the couple. They're driving to, I described them. I described them where they are at in their marriage. They're not totally happy. They've had a tragedy, and they're driving to the chateau and they're meeting it. And that was what I first started with. And I was really happy with what I wrote. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Now let's change it up. Let's start changing things up. And so then at that point, I got to a point where I was like, okay, what's going to happen next? I could just keep writing, or maybe I should start forming this more, build a skeleton, if you will, of an outline. And so that's what I ended up doing. I started outlining, and I have a background in screenwriting. I love movies. I love the pace of movies. I love first act, second act, third act. I love trilogies. Star Wars trilogy, the original, was one of my favorite things ever. Empire Strikes Back is my favorite movie of all time, just because it resonated with me. I love tragedies. I love the way it ended. I love the shocks in it. It was just like almost like a perfect story to me. But it's also the second act in a trilogy. And the second act is where you really put people through their paces. And so that's what I do is I start off with a rough 3-act outline. So I'll chop it into 3 pieces, and I'll say, okay, like I shoot for maybe 30 chapters, 300 so pages. Okay, the first 10 chapters are this. And then part 2, this, part 3, this. But the outline is, I don't go chapter by chapter. I'm just very, very quickly saying, this is what happens in section 1, act 1, act 2, act 3. And then I go and chop it up into chapters. This is what happens in chapter 1, 2, 3, and I end up with about 30 chapters. In this case, I ended up with 41 in the first book, just because that's just the way it came together, and the pacing, the way I cut some of the chapters. I was like the director. I was like, okay, cut this scene, cut right now. This is like a great place to stop, or put a little break in it, chapter break. But yeah, so I organize it, but I definitely do pantsing I'm more of a plotter, but I do the pantsing part. And I definitely, elaborated and made some changes as I was going for sure. Definitely. Like there were so many little things that I added on that were like, okay, this can use that, or I can, the section when they're in Martinique and there's a character that another character meets. I don't want to give away too much. That was very much a Panzer type situation about the details about the family and stuff. So I don't know if you guys have gotten that far. It's deeper in the book. It's probably three-quarters of the way through the book. But yeah, so it's a combination, mostly organization though, mostly an outliner for sure.
I do. I'm a big fan of just the structure from the beginning, just how you decided to use, the action and everything, and the gruesomeness and the wolves and all that, and then you jump, 70 years later, and then we jump into their lives, and it reminded me a lot of like horror movies, a lot of horror stories, a lot of like the Haunting of Hill House, right? Like how that kind of starts. There's this crazy like situation, and they all have to run out of the house, and then you jump into the future, and they're all adults now, and then it's just that like so what happened, and like right away I was like, oh man, so there's these completely different people who aren't connected to it at all. Where's this gonna go, right? It brings up
Hmm.
so many questions, and I think that was like one of the biggest grabs for me, that I was like, oh man, this is where I'm excited about, because I know it's not just going to be that. There's a lot of history, and that's just a little part of it, and just to have that little taste of the horror and the chaos of the past, and then there's these people that are, oh, it's beautiful, and I just like that kind of contrast.
Yeah, they're like, again, like I wanted to show, especially with that prologue, that the chateau has had some really horrible things happen to it. It was on fire, 300 years ago. It was about to collapse, but it didn't. Like, what happened? So I wanted people to, have that mystery. And that's what the readers have told me over and over again. They're like, I feel like something was going to happen almost every time I turn the page. And so I just kept reading and I could not stop. And I was like, okay, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was going for. So,
Yeah, I think right at the beginning, you're establishing a history of tragedy. Even if we don't know the extent of the tragedy, you're establishing this is a history of tragedy that's occurring with this house and
hmm
or with the chateau. And there is a danger. I mean, you see Vivian in there, and there's like the whole showdown going on, and then you don't know what happens at the end of her chapter. It's not clean cut, you know? You realize she's in some kind of delusion or some kind of illusion. Um,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think you played that even well, and I don't want to give too much away for people, but it's early in the book. Even with the idea that, she's engorging, like she's just gorging out on food. And then the last sentence we have is there's no food there. So
hmm
you're already like, okay, what madness is she in? What part of that? And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it also makes you question how far does that go of what
hmm
was real, what wasn't real,
Right.
and from when she entered the chateau. And I like that. I like when I'm questioning myself, like, wait a minute, what just happened? What part was, oh, here we go. And it's fun. And I do think your history in screenwriting and your love for film translates very clearly in this book. It
Thank
reads
you.
as a movie, and not like, hey, I'm reading a script, but it plays out pacing. As far as what I've read so far, pacing, visualization, the way you bring everything together, the way you deliver the action, it reads very much like a movie.
Yeah, like you said, and yeah, that's where the screenwriting background came from. I really learned story structure doing that, and I also learned efficiency of writing because you just can't spend a lot of time when you're writing a script. One page is 1 minute on the film, so you have depending on what kind of movie you're making, you have a 60-page script or a 90-page script. It's short, and there's rules involved. You're not supposed to write. monologues, long descriptive sections. So when I think I wrote 7 or 8 movies. Some of them, just for me, just for fun. Some of them I submitted. My big moment was I pitched a Bloomhouse one time. That was like the farthest I made it into the film world, and I was super excited. They didn't do anything with it, of course. But yeah, it's just the movie. That movie is in my head. Like that's the way I'm looking at it. I don't use actors. I've been asked that many times. Like I don't have actors in mind. I just have these composite characters. I know what they look like. But that's kind of the strange thing about like having a movie mind. But I don't have actors in mind. Like there are a lot of people like, well, who would you have play Anna? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, who would you have play Anna? Like, she's her own distinct character. She doesn't look like anybody else. She's Anna. And same thing with Brad. So I love that people have unwound the story as like a movie. And I mean, I've had a lot of people come on my lives and go, when are they going to make a TV series out of this or a movie? And
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
like, whenever, I've had one inquiry about film rights. They're like, is the film rights available? And I'm like, yeah. But there hasn't been any follow up on that. So that was a recent thing that kind of blew me away. I was not expecting that after the book's only been out for like 2 months. So, but that was like maybe somebody read it and was like, hey, this would make a good movie, and I would prefer to see it as a series. I'm a huge Mike Flanagan fan. Everything he's done on Netflix was just
Yes.
insane. I've had people compare it to Hill House, and I'm like, well, I started writing it before I even knew about Hill House. Like, I wrote it, the first draft was done before the Netflix show came out, and same thing with the cover of the book. And I never read Shirley Jackson's book. I wasn't even aware of it because it was written quite a long time ago. But I always talk about it on my lives. I'm like, hey, Mike Flanagan, if you're out there, like, got the story here,
It's
so
available.
it's available. I love his work. I just finished Fall of the House of Usher that he did, and it was
Yes.
just phenomenal. I love Edgar Allan Poe's work, and he just integrated everything just so perfectly into that show. I loved it. It was scary. It had jump scares that literally like made me jump, and that's really hard to make me do. So
Which
anyway.
which one did you like better, Hill House or Fall of the House of Usher? I know they're different, but
Yeah, I liked Hill House the best. That was my first introduction to him unknowingly. I didn't know that it was his movie. It was Oculus. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's incredible.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible movie. But I didn't realize it at the time. I'm like, I saw the director. I'm like, okay, I don't know who that is. Cool. This was a long time ago. But the movie blew me away. It was so scary. It was so original. It was low budget, obviously, and I love that. I love that in a good horror movie. When you can do all these incredible things with not very much. I love that. That makes me so happy. And so I only learned later on that he did that. And I was like, oh, well, my gosh. I mean, I love this guy. But yeah, Hill House was my first knowing introduction into that because it was, advertised on Netflix. It was huge. It was, one of their big series. And I loved the kid from E.T. was the dad. I watched E.T. as a little, I mean, I was in third grade when E.T. came out. Loved that movie. I love Henry Thomas. He's an author. He's an actor and he's an author. But I love the family dynamic of it. The family confrontation was so intense, and the technicality of the show, the scene where this interview is going to turn into a Mike Flanagan commercial essentially, but
Maybe if you say his name enough, it'll like flag him in some kind of hashtag and he'll come listen.
yeah, the scene. I don't know if you guys ever caught it, but the scene where they're in they're in the morgue. The sisters. Am I saying it right? The not the morgue. What do you call it? The
Mortuary or yeah,
mortuary.
yep.
Yeah.
The mortuary. There is like a 15-minute long scene where the camera does never it never
The one
cuts.
shot, yes.
The one
Yes.
shot, and I
Yes.
caught that the first time, and I was like, okay, this is technically very, very difficult to put all of that together, have those actors be where they need to be. That is really hard to do. And again, that's like where my movie thing comes from. I'm like, I love technical work in movies and shows, and I identify it. And when people watch movies with me, they're like, "Shut up, Blake! Like you're like we don't care that they cut right there." Or like sometimes I'll go and scene or cut,
Yeah.
like right where I would cut the film, and they're like, What are you talking about?" I'm like, just ignore me, okay?
I,
You're in the right crowd here.
yes,
I was gonna say, I feel
We're
like Ashley does that too. So yeah.
Shh.
yeah,
No, it's
no.
fun to watch movies with Ashley, though. It really is.
Yeah, it's great. That particular show I watch every year. Every year I watch The Haunting of Hill House, and yes, I pick up on stuff all the time because it is like a masterpiece. I think, like just the way they
Absolutely.
go back in time, right? They the transitions, right? You from kids to adults, and just the situations how there's a match there that makes the transition smooth, but then the circumstances completely different and sometimes jarring, but great. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There's this ongoing haunting, and it's not just it haunts every single one of them in their own particular way, and I love how they like each episode focuses on each child as an adult and how this thing formed their lives. You get the drug addict, and you have one of my favorite characters. I can't remember her name, but the one that has to wear the gloves because
yeah.
she's super sensitive, and she can feel people's feelings and kind of see what happened. I love that part, and so
I think she's married to Mike
she
Flanagan.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Katie,
Yeah.
I can't remember her last name.
Oh,
Siegel,
Katie Seagal
Seagal.
is that
Yeah,
who it
yeah,
is?
Siegel, Kate
yeah.
Siegel,
Something like that.
Theo. Yeah.
Theo, yes, yes, Theo.
Honestly, I love the way you describe that. It haunts them in their own way. And for some reason, that just like it reminded me of it, how,
Oh yeah,
he represents fear, but the fear is dependent on each individual and how it presents itself. And that is also well done. I know there's been controversy on what people believe, but I actually feel like the remakes they made were well done and almost highlighted that more the individualized fear and the terror that was brought. So I just sidetracked.
no, I loved it. I read the book when I was younger. I mean, it's a marathon read. That's a
Hmm.
long book.
It is a book.
Yeah, it took me my whole like middle school year of eighth grade to read that book. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There was times when I was like, oh gosh, I have to push myself through this. But I really enjoyed it. I loved the first series they made, and I
Hmm.
feel like it came out in the 90s. I feel like it was a television series, and
Hmm.
Tim Curry played Pennywise, and that's the first one I saw. I saw the first It movie, the new ones, but I haven't seen part two yet. So I just love that first one so much. Not necessarily the first new movie. I mean, I'm talking about like the series. Like
Hmm.
Yeah.
it was really in depth.
I think for the new ones, like because they did split it into two movies with the kids and then the adults, I do feel the first one landed a whole lot better than the second one. Not to say the second one was a bad film, I just think the first one did a much better job of landing. That's just me though. Now, do you have a favorite scary movie, horror
Yes, that was
film?
going to be my question.
Like, what's your ultimate favorite?
My all-time favorite is The Exorcist.
Oh,
Came
Yes.
out came out the year I was born. I watched it when I was 2. No, I'm just kidding. No. Um, I read the book first in high school, and I remember I read it over spring break, and it just terrified me. And I was so glad I was reading it during the day. It is, I don't know if you guys have read the book. It is a scary book. It's really well done. And and then the movie equally equal. I mean, it's one of those rare situations where I feel like they're both on par together, like on the same level. It's hard to do that with a movie and a book. And the movie, especially the director's cut, with the more intense scenes that they could not put in the theater back in 1973, that is terrifying because that's in the book. That's a favorite. I watch that one a lot. Um, Definitely possession type of books or movies really scare me. The first Paranormal Activity movie actually really, I
That
loved
wrecked
it.
me.
I loved it. I was not expecting to like that movie, and I was engrossed, and I really liked it. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. I watched that one, and I watched a lot of horror movies when I was way too young.
No
I
such thing.
remember I watched I watched that when I was maybe in middle school or early in high school, and I remember I had to walk home after watching that at like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and I was so scared. Like I thought Leatherface was going to pop out in every bush I walked by. So I'm trying to think of some other ones. The Shining's a favorite. One of I feel like Jack's best performances. So technically, such a beautifully well shot movie. I love anything Stanley Kubrick does. The first Halloween movie. That was one again I saw way too young. I was like 7 or 8 when I watched that, and I that was like the day I lost my innocence essentially. Like,
Oh no.
um, yeah, my friend who lived up the street, his dad had rented the first two Halloween movies and then Helter Skelter, the first movie they made about the book about Charles Manson, and I had never heard of serial killers or anything like this, and so his dad was gone, and he's like, "Come over, we're gonna watch these movies." And I'm like, and he'd never seen them either. And we did. We watched all three movies back to back to back in one day, and I was changed, damaged, scarred forever. I didn't sleep in my bed for like 2 months. I slept next to my parents' bed for like 2 months after that.
I have no judgment. I grew up on Hellraiser and Nightmare on Elm Street and all of those films. And when I say grow up, like I'm talking young child, like 4, 5, 6, 7, all
Yeah.
the way up. And should have been watching those, but my mom's a big horror fan and she's like, let's watch these. So I feel like I'm a well adjusted individual.
Yeah, to this day, my nephew, every time I see him, he always reminds me, like, you scarred me, like, you made me watch Child's Play when I was like 6, and I was babysitting him. And I was like, oh, there's a doll. Like, I've seen this movie. I think there's a doll in this. I think you're gonna like it. And he was scarred. Like, it freaked him out so much because I didn't realize like how powerful Chucky would be for a child.
I think it depends on the child. I've got 3 kiddos and my eldest, I think it was like 2 years ago, she started really getting into horror. The middle one cannot tolerate horror. He absolutely avoids it. It's not his cup of tea. My 5-year-old, however, he goes out of his way to ask me to put on horror. And I'm just like, oh, you're still young, bud. But he demands, like, he wants to watch Chucky. He thinks Chucky is hilarious. And I'm just like, what is wrong with you? um, and it really, those things don't scare him. He'll walk in the room and I'm watching like 30 Days of Night and he's just like, eh, and sits down and he thinks to him it's like an action movie. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that's fun. That's funny how some kids are like that. I mean, my son is 8 and he got really into horror when he was young, like 5. He started drawing. He was into this character called Siren Head. I don't know if you guys have heard of this character. It's in video games, and he watches a lot of YouTube stuff.
Siren
And
Head sounds familiar. Which game is
it's
that
just
from?
I don't remember really what the game was, but it's just this giant monster. He's super tall and super skinny. I mean, he's like 200 feet tall, and he has like He has like
Oh.
bull horns as his like head.
Mm.
And I don't really know a lot about him, but my son was just always like
That was his thing.
fascinated by him. And I remember at some point I had a teacher conference with his teacher, and his teacher was like, "So Max draws a lot of this creature as like his hero. Like, are you okay with that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine." Like,
Sure.
he sees him as a powerful, I did that when I was young. I drew pictures of Optimus Prime. Yes, that's Siren Head.
Mm. That's creepy.
And it gave me when I was a kid, those characters made me feel stronger. It was like, okay, that's a representation of strength to me when I felt small or bullied or whatever, like Optimus Prime and, Megatron.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I would turn myself into those characters and nobody could defeat me. And so that's what Siren Head was to him. And I had no problem with that, and I explained that to the teacher.
Now, has any of that carried over into your writing? Like any of the inspiration that you had that helped you feel stronger, more empowered as you were growing up, or anything you watched, whether it be The Exorcist or The Shining, did any of that kind of help drive or inspire some of what you've been writing now?
That's a good question. I certainly, I've always been interested in haunted houses since I was a kid, and so when I was young, 12, I was more like 11, but when Ghostbusters came out, 1984, my friends and I were the Ghostbusters, and back in the 80s, I say this on my live show a lot, but back in the 80s, there were houses that were abandoned and they didn't fence them off or anything. Like you could just go into them and they didn't have like safety standards or they didn't care. And so we had this local haunted house that was really scary, and we would go in there and pretend we were the Ghostbusters. And like we would invent just these crazy ideas in our heads just for fun and make it interesting. But I mean, in reality, that's kind of where my chateau came from too. Later on, was like, oh, here's this broken house where you could literally fall through the floor at any moment. Like it's just broken down. And so that youthful experience definitely inspired a lot of the description inside the chateau and what she feels. And I remember what that house smelled like, and that's where a lot of that came from for sure.
Now, being that you ghost busted and lived out those paranormal fun adventures, have you experienced anything paranormal or what you feel might be paranormal?
Yes, I am. I've always been a skeptic. I've never had an experience until about 3 years ago or so, maybe four. I was living in Idaho at the time, Pocatello, Idaho, this little town, and I had quit my career. I was a cartographer for 20 years. I made maps. It's what I got my degree in out of college. I'd done that for 20 years, but I was like, I started writing the Haunting of Chateau de Mornay, and I'm like, this is my passion now, and nothing's going to get in my way. And so, goodbye career. So I quit my job, and but I had to pay the bills, and I had to do other work. So I drove Uber and Lyft for a while, and I would wait at the airport for the ding ding to go off on my Lyft app or whatever. And so I was sitting there one day, and this I saw this gentleman standing there, and he was wearing this old suit, brown suit, old fedora hat, and he had this old time suitcase. And I was just watching, and I was like, wow, he's really out of place here. This is interesting. And he saw me looking at him, and he came over to the car. I rolled the window down, and he goes, hey, can you get me a lift into a town? Are you a taxi? And I'm like, well, do you have a phone? Do you have an app that can do that? Like I was trying to run through the technicalities, and he's
Right.
like, no, I do not have a cell phone. No. And I'm like, he goes, and he had this funny accent. He definitely was not from the area. He was like from New York or something like that. Like he had this like really strong accent. And he goes, hey, I'll pay you $20 to take me into town and take me to this address. I'm like, okay. So he was an older guy, and he had a really big suitcase, and it was an old suitcase. and I put it in the back of the car, and he got in, and we started driving. It was like a 15-minute drive into town. And so, I was curious about this guy. I was asking him, like, what are you doing in town? Like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, I actually don't really know why I'm here. I just got off the plane, and I don't have a phone. I don't know anybody. And I was like, wait, you don't know anybody in town? You don't know why you're here? And he's like, yeah, I just got off the plane and I'm here. And I was like, okay. And then he goes, hey, is there like a horse track around here? Is there a place I can put some bets down, And I was like, okay, this guy's like a gangster. This is really weird. Like, he's from like a gangster noir movie from the 40s or something like that. And I'm like, actually, yes, we do have a horse track in this little town. They do have a lot of horses, and we do have a horse track you can go bet. And he was like, oh, great, that sounds so great. So we were just driving, and I realized as we were going, this was a really unusual, odd man. And I just kept asking him questions. Like, I don't remember exactly what I asked him, but I just realized that he really knew nobody in town. He didn't know why he was in town. And he was dressed old, and it was just really eerie. And so he gave me the address, and we drive up to the address, and it's one of the oldest buildings in town. And it used to be a boarding house. And it's one of those, like, with the big porch out front, and it's got columns and stuff. And he's like, okay, yeah, here's where I need to go. And I was like, okay. So I got out, and I grabbed his suitcase, and I took it up to the door, and I looked inside the windows, and it was totally dark inside. Like, there was no lights on. And I was like, oh, that's when it hit me. I was like, oh, like, I got this really massive chill. And I was like, this guy is not real. He's not. There's no way this guy is real. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to see you later. I got to go.
Right on
And
me, I'm out.
yeah, so I put the case down, and I got in the car, and I didn't like tear out of there or anything, but I watched him as I was driving away, and he didn't even try to go inside. He watched me drive away. Like, watched me. I saw him in the rearview mirror, and he was still watching me, and I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go home. Like, I can't drive the rest of the day. Like, that was so weird. And I've told people that story, and they're like, yeah, he was transitioning from like one plane to another or something like that. But when I say plane, I don't mean like airplane. Like, he was
Literally got off the plane.
yeah, he says he got off the plane, but he was moving from one plane of existence to another. And as a skeptic, that was the only moment where I was like, I can't really explain what just happened. That was very strange. And yeah.
That is an amazing story. Like, I do similar jobs. I drive a shuttle. I also drive in Denver, here in Colorado. And if some like that just hit me, like, that would be so amazing to have something like that. My question is, did he give you the $20?
He gave me $40.
Oh,
And were
nice.
they
Yeah,
new 40? Like, were they of this,
yeah,
decade?
yeah. I checked for sure, but he had a roll of cash. Like he had the old school roll of cash. Like, I feel like this guy was like a gangster or something, and he was going to the track to like make money or whatever. But I was like, how's he going to get to the track? Like, he's going to have to call another Uber, but he can't call anybody. Like, he doesn't have a phone. Like, what's he going to do? So anyway, yeah, he gave me $40.
Let's be clear. If there are ghosts out there with legitimate cash, sure. I'll do the service. Like, you want to ride? Sure, why not? That needs to be on your description. I'll drive you whether you're human or ghost. The cash has to be real.
Yeah, just as long as there's a ghost cash exchange somewhere. Like, if you get your cash from 18th century France, make sure you convert it over to like 21st century American dollars. So
Creepy currency is not allowed.
yeah.
I almost wanted to like hear more, right? Like be like, hey man, like, you want to drop your stuff off here? I'll take you to the track. Let's make a day of it.
Let's make a day of it.
I'll be your driver for the day. Like it's like one of those things. It doesn't happen to you. You know this in your mind. You're like, this is like the strangest thing that's ever happened to me as a driver. Like, let's see where this goes, because obviously, I mean, you do it in areas, you do it during the day time, right? There's a lot of people around, that kind of thing, so you don't necessarily feel unsafe, but also like, and you didn't feel probably really threatened either at all.
Not
So
at
it's
all.
right.
BJ, this is how horror movies are made. Like, let's hang out for a whole day.
I could certainly turn this into a story. Yeah.
Have you considered turning any of your scripts that you created into books?
Yeah. I my favorite script I wrote was actually, I am really fascinated and by like the whole like post World War II, like when they were like sentencing and like the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis and stuff. I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the people who hunted them down, who a lot of Nazis fled to South America. There was countries that were open to, like Argentina accepted them and let them go there, and some other countries. And throughout the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s and 80s, like especially once Israel was formed into a country, they had the Secret Service, and they went and hunted these folks down and wanted to bring them to justice. So I wrote a script about a guy who basically had done something like that. He had had that experience in World War II, and he wanted to go hunt down this particular like commandant of this camp, right? And it turned into an action movie. Like he was the 70s, like he assembled this like crack crew of like the A team, like these guys to like Americans. Like he shows up at this bar and he's like, "Hey, I'm looking for this guy," and like he's like, this guy's like a drunk, but he's also a mercenary. And so yeah, I made this whole script about it. It's one of my favorites. It's just a kind of like a funny, almost cheesy 70s action slash 80s action movie, but it has this like whole like hunting, very realistic hunting situation in it, where they want to find this guy and not necessarily bring him to Nuremberg. Like, this guy has his own personal vendetta against him. So I would love to write that book.
We would love to read that book. Now, with The Haunting of Chateau de Mornay, have you planted, or did you plant any Easter eggs in there that you were anticipating would lead or tie into your book too?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've had a lot of people ask me, is this a standalone? Like, when I do my lives, is this a standalone? Is this a trilogy? Well, when I started writing it, it was a standalone. I wasn't intending anything more out of it. But as I got deeper into it, I was like, I'm just going to leave that part there, like leave that open, because I think I can pick this up later on. But it's so small that I don't think anybody who reads it as a standalone is even going to care. It's such a small little Easter egg. But when if you get into the story and then you read book 2, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that from book 1. So I left several really small things in there, and also I went back once I realized I wanted to write a trilogy out of it. I did wrap up the first book, but I left a little tiny opening for more intentionally. And so, yeah, there's some things in book 1 that are definitely going to be picked up in book 2 for sure.
That's exciting. Now, when do you anticipate that you may be releasing book 2?
When I would do it?
Yeah, if you're like, girl, slow it down. I'm still in the writing process.
Yeah, I have a lot of people ask me that again during the live, especially the people who finished the first book. They're like, when can I have more? Like, I want more. And I'm like, okay, it is like this whole experience has been such, like so much for me. Like, it's changed my life. I don't work my day job anymore. I work on my book constantly. I'm selling enough books now where I can support myself. And, but it's all, I have to package, I have to sign the books, I have to package them, I have to take them to the post office. This requires a lot of time. So I split my day up into writing, packaging, and then selling at the end of the day. Like, I spend 2 or 3 hours selling. And so I always tell people, like, I just don't really know what the timeline's like. It's not going to take 7 years, like for sure. Like absolutely not. Like I'm trying to blast through this thing as fast as I can. So I'm still in the early stages. I've probably written 30 pages. I have a lot of just, I call it my notes. I have sections where I've just written dialogue between characters where it's like, I don't know where I'm going to put this, but it's going to go in the book somewhere. And that's another process that I do is I don't write chronologically in a book. Like I write chapter 20 and then I write chapter 5. Then I write this. I write what I feel like in the moment. I don't force myself to write because I find that I don't write very well when I do that. It's like someone's like holding a gun to my head and saying, "Write right now. You have to write chapter 10 right now." And I'm like, "No, I'm not doing that." So I write what I feel. If I feel like writing a spicy scene, I'll write that. And I'll just put it in my master file, and I know it's in the book somewhere, and I will just find where it needs to sit. And I kind of consider it like a jigsaw puzzle. Like I have all these pieces, and I start forming this section, and then I form this section, and then eventually the whole thing comes together. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I'm so busy with this whole thing. I've sold over probably approaching 1,600 books at this point after 2 months, and I've sold almost all of them just by my own hands on my TikTok. It is on Amazon, it's on Etsy, it's in different distribution sites and stuff, but mostly I'm selling it myself, but it takes a lot of time. So I do a lot of writing on my phone at night when I can't sleep or research. So yeah, it's coming together. It's really hard to like pin down when I'm going to have it, but getting the cover done. And now I know what that looks like, and having that to look at, that really, like I said earlier, that motivates me to like, okay, that's what I need to finish. I have to write this book, and I have to do it pretty quick. Yeah, so I've told people like, don't expect a lot out of me for the next like while, because I've had my friends and my family are like, we can help you pack up your books, like anything we can do. My mom helped me last week, like pack books up, and she was great. And my dad watches my live shows, and he was a businessman his whole life, so he's helping me like, because it's essentially I'm starting a small business. I'm an independent author, and I've never done this before, and so he's giving me a lot of advice. And so yeah, it's been crazy. It's gone much better than I expected, and I'm very happy about that. But it's a time commitment.
I love that you gave the extended answer because you just answered like 5 of my questions in one response. I love it.
I tend to do that. I can be a little long-winded. So
No, I think it's great. Now, with the self-publishing aspect of being, independent author, did you have to just figure it out on your own, or was there anything useful that you came across to really help you navigate through that aspect?
once I decided to go self, I was amazed at how easy it was. And it made me very happy because the whole process reminds me of the independent music scene in like the late 80s, early 90s, like even like early Nirvana. Like they built their first album with $600 and they went into a studio and they made this killer album. I love that idea of like just like not having, tons of support. I'm in control of everything. And so I was amazed that like I didn't have to front any money. I didn't have to pay any money to get like, Amazon to distribute the book. A lot of people ask me who publishes it. Well, I'm like, they just print it. I mean, I'm the publisher, they're the publisher. Like I use 3 different distributors based on like the quality of their book, like what kind of, is it a well-made book or is it not? I've tried some out. There's one that I don't want to use anymore. So it was just nice to not have to front $1,000, just to like pay somebody to get me going. But I did have to front some money to, once I got going, to like, buy the author copies that I have to sign. And that's mostly what it is now, is just getting those books and make sure I have enough supply and I'm stretching out to other merchandising right now. Like there's other people have asked for other stuff, not just the book. They love the book cover. They want to put it on stuff. And but yeah, it was relatively easy, and I love just being like in control of all of that. The only thing that's been frustrating for me is the speed in which the books arrive to me. That's a variable that was very frustrating in the beginning because I had to tell my fans, sorry, I don't have, like, I expected the books 3 days ago and they did not show up. So I can't send you anything right now. And that was incredibly frustrating for me, but the fans were cool about it. Like nobody, absolutely nobody gave me a hard time about it. I communicated to everybody what the situation was and they were all super cool about it. And, but now I have the conveyor belt going, the process is rolling, and I feel like I have a better grasp on the whole thing.
So, for those that want to buy a signed copy of your book, they can get it on TikTok. And did you say also, are they able to get it on Etsy?
Yes, yes, I have an Etsy shop called Blake's Books Shop, plural books. So there's two S's together, Books Shop. Apparently Blake's Bookshop was taken from somebody else, and so I had to add an extra S and make it plural, but whatever, it worked.
But it
And
works.
yeah, so same price, same situation. I sign those, and yeah, you can get them there too.
Now, my last question. Where can people find you? Other than Etsy. You told us Etsy.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. That's another site that I use quite a bit. Uh, I'm under author Blake Edward Andrew on Instagram too. It's that and TikTok are pretty much where I'm at. I haven't had time to build a website yet. I spend so much time on TikTok that's kind of my platform. Like I spiked the other day. I had 300 people watching my show the other night. Like and I had to go. Like I had to leave, and I was like, I don't want to leave. I had a live TikTok interview the other night, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just sold 10 books in 20 minutes. Like I don't want to leave. Like, but I have to go do this interview. So that's where people are going. That's what I'm advertising, and I love interacting with people. People love to go there, and they come back and they talk about the book with me. They tell me what they thought of it, or like I'm halfway through it, I'm loving it, I can't wait to finish it, or whatever. It's really motivating me and keeping me positive throughout the whole process. And I love, and they love it too. They love having their questions answered, like in real time, and me saying their names. And I don't just sit there and sign books. I can't do that. Like I tried that one day. I tried to just, some authors can do that and it works for them, but I was trying to sign books, and my TikTok, I had all these questions coming up. I'm like, I can't ignore this. So I just stopped and I went over and I'm like, okay, this is my realm. This is a better place for me. So yeah, definitely TikTok, and I'm crossing my fingers that it stays around. That's a big one for me. I don't know what I'm going to do if that goes away. So
Now, I highly encourage our listeners to check out his TikTok lives. Like he said, he's very engaging, very interactive, answers all the questions he can catch, because sometimes you get a bombardment of questions, but he does try to get to all of them, at least from the ones that I've caught. And yeah, really, really good experience.
thank
Do
you. I
you?
have I have moderators too that help me. I have two, and well, I'm trying to get the third one set up. I keep forgetting to, but they really help me out because yeah, I can't catch all these comments that are coming in, and they answer a lot of the questions for me for sure.
Now, do you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap this amazing episode up?
I just want to say thanks for coming on. Like I really enjoy talking with you. I think there's just a lot of parallels with what you have done and what we do. Like just the filmmaking aspect side of it. Like I think there's a lot of similar interests in things, and so I'm excited about book two whenever that comes out, and finishing the rest of this first one, and I don't know, maybe you'll get into some short stories too. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, that's something I would love to do eventually, is get more into like an anthology of short stories. that would be fun. Totally.
I'll go on whatever ride you want to take us on.
In the time being, I'm in this trilogy for like, the run for a while indefinitely. So for sure. Awesome.
You got me
Thank you.
hooked.
Yeah, thank
Excellent.
you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John Thomas, you want to bring us home?
I do. Thank you again for coming on, and thank you for all of our listeners for listening to this episode of 3Haunted Podcast. With your host, I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And I'm BJ Segura.
If you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss amazing guests like Mr. Blake Edward Andrew.
That was really
No?
drawn out.
That was.
Yes, that's right. It was just-
Yes.
I'm like, did you forget his name?
No, I was breathing. I was talking too fast.
Until next time.